Friends, fellow travelers on the winding path of history, settle in. Dim the lights, find your focus, and prepare to journey with me back to a time when the very fabric of society was being rewoven in the crucible of conflict and ambition. Tonight, we uncover a forgotten warrior, a man of the land who wielded a sword, a farmer who rode to war alongside kings. We delve into the extraordinary world of the Knight-Villein, a figure whose very existence challenges our understanding of medieval class and power. Join me as we peel back the layers of centuries and remember, if this journey speaks to you, a like, a comment, or a share helps us continue these explorations together. Now, let us begin. Good evening or good morning wherever you may be, and welcome back to another deep dive into the fascinating and often overlooked corners of our shared past. Tonight, we're journeying back to a time of shifting borders, of faith and steel, to the rugged frontiers of medieval Iberia. We're going to explore a unique social phenomenon, a class of individuals who straddled the lines of war and work, privilege and plebeian life, in a way that truly redefined what it meant to be a commoner. We're going to talk about the Knight-Villein. Now, when you picture medieval society, a clear image often comes to mind, doesn't it? The powerful king at the top, the grand nobles with their castles and retinues, the humble peasants toiling in the fields, and perhaps the heavily armored knights, symbols of chivalry and martial might. It's a neat, hierarchical structure, easy to grasp, but history, as we've learned time and again, is rarely so neatly packaged. And in the crucible of the Iberian Reconquista, where Christian kingdoms battled for centuries against the Muslim caliphates of Al-Andalus, a new, utterly distinct social class emerged, challenging those very preconceptions. Imagine, if you will, a free plebeian, not a noble, not born into the aristocracy with a lineage stretching back through counts and dukes. Yet this individual possesses land, often significant enough to provide a comfortable living. They own not just the tools of their trade, be it farming or crafts, but also weapons. And crucially, they own a horse, a vital, expensive, and status-defining possession in the medieval world. This wasn't just any commoner. This was a **Cavaleiro Vilão ** in Portuguese, or a **Caballero Villano ** in Spanish. And their existence, their very identity, tells a profound story about the dynamic, often brutal and ever-evolving landscape of medieval Portugal, Castile, and Leon. The sheer novelty of this class lies in its duality. Villein usually denotes a peasant bound to the land, beholden to a lord. But to append knight to it, that's where the fascinating contradiction, the unique historical texture, begins to unravel. These weren't professional soldiers in the typical sense, nor were they landless laborers. They were, in essence, citizen soldiers, integral to the very fabric of these burgeoning Christian kingdoms. What truly set the Knight-Villein apart, beyond their material possessions, was their direct military service. Unlike the vast majority of commoners, who might be pressed into service as foot soldiers or provide labor for fortifications, the Knight-Villein provided military service directly to the king. This wasn't a feudal obligation to a local lord. This was a direct bond, a personal contract with the monarch, placing them on a significantly different footing within the social order. And what did they receive in return for this perilous service? Privileges. Significant privileges. Privileges that in many ways mirrored those enjoyed by the minor nobility. Think about that for a moment. A commoner enjoying the same legal and economic advantages as someone of noble birth. It's a concept that would have been almost unthinkable in other parts of medieval Europe. For instance, Knight-Villeins were exempt from **scutage**. Now, for those unfamiliar, scutage was essentially a tax paid by a knight or noble in lieu of performing military service. It was a common financial burden for the aristocracy. To be exempt from it was a clear signal of their valued military contribution. Their service was considered so vital, so irreplaceable, that the king deemed it payment enough. Even more remarkably, their testimony in court held significant weight. In an era where the word of a commoner often counted for little against that of a noble, where legal proceedings could be swayed by status and influence, the testimony of a Knight-Villein was considered proof. This wasn't just a convenience. It was a profound acknowledgement of their standing, their perceived honor, and their trustworthiness within the community. It speaks volumes about the respect they commanded and the crucial role they played in maintaining law and order, not just on the battlefield but in the everyday life of the kingdom. Now, while most commoners fought on foot, equipped with spears or bows, the Knight-Villeins' possessions fundamentally altered their role. If their property indicated a certain level of affluence, enough land, livestock, and goods, they were legally obligated to own a horse. This wasn't a choice. It was a mandate. And by owning that horse, they ascended to the rank of Knight-Villein, placing them at the highest tier of free commoners, just beneath the nobility itself. It was a status earned through economic capacity, and more importantly, through the implicit understanding of their future military obligations. We get glimpses of this fascinating obligation in records from the time. The town charter of Penella, for example, provides a vivid snapshot of the material requirements. All those that dwell here and have 2 yoke of oxen and 10 sheep and 2 cows and a bed of cloth, he that has more, let him get also a horse. This wasn't some abstract ideal. It was a concrete measure of wealth that directly translated into a military responsibility and, in turn, into a distinct social identity. This wasn't merely about possessing wealth. It was about the kingdom recognizing that wealth as a resource for its defense and expansion. In medieval Portugal, these Knight-Villeins were not just an occasional asset. They were a systemic and critical component of the military machine. 2/3 of them were obligated to participate in a **fasado**, a raid into Muslim territory, for a set number of weeks each year. These weren't defensive actions. These were offensive strikes, vital for weakening enemy forces, disrupting their supply lines, and, crucially, for seizing plunder and expanding Christian territory. And yes, they were entitled to a share of the captured loot, a powerful incentive, certainly, but also a legitimate part of their income, blurring the lines between military service and economic endeavor. But just as there were rewards, there were also consequences for shirking their duty. If a foreign invasion threatened and a Knight-Villein failed to respond to the call to arms, they faced a hefty fine of 15 soldos. This was not a trifling sum. It was a significant penalty, underscoring the seriousness of their military obligation and the vital role they played in the kingdom's defense. What's even more remarkable is that these Knight-Villeins often didn't wait for a royal summons to engage in military action. They frequently organized raids on Muslim lands of their own initiative. Think about that. Commoners, not acting under the direct command of a noble or a king, but independently organizing small-scale military expeditions. This speaks volumes about their martial spirit, their familiarity with the frontier, and perhaps their desire for economic gain through plunder. These independent military activities, combined with their formal obligations, meant that Knight-Villeins were drawn to the volatile, ever-changing frontier. They settled in or around the frontier towns in southern or eastern Portugal, regions that were constantly contested, constantly in flux. Their presence gave these towns a distinct military character, transforming them into bastions of defense and springboards for further expansion. These weren't just agricultural communities. They were fortified settlements, populated by men capable of wielding both a plow and a sword. Indeed, the period between the capture of Coimbra in 1064 and the capture of Lisbon in 1147 was a critical juncture in the Reconquista. And during this pivotal era, the conquest of land from Al-Andalus into what would become Portugal was not primarily undertaken by the grand armies of kings or the elite forces of high nobility. Instead, it was largely carried out by the efforts of minor nobles, and perhaps even more significantly, by these very Knight-Villeins, hailing from the towns and rural communities of the frontier. They were the gritty, determined, and often overlooked backbone of the expansion, pushing the borders, securing new territories, and laying the foundations for the future kingdom of Portugal. The rise of the Knight-Villein, therefore, is more than just a footnote in medieval history. It's a powerful illustration of how the pressures of prolonged warfare, the constant need for expansion, and the fluid nature of frontier life can forge entirely new social structures. It's a testament to the adaptability of medieval society and the willingness of kings to grant unprecedented privileges to those who proved themselves invaluable on the battlefield. These were not just commoners. They were integral components of a new social and military order, their lives intertwined with the destiny of their burgeoning nations. And their story, as we'll see, is one of incredible resilience, unique privilege, and a constant dance between the demands of the plow and the call of the sword. Welcome back, my friends. Last time we laid the groundwork for a fascinating, and dare I say, almost mythical figure of medieval Iberia, the Knight-Villein. We talked about their improbable rise, a social anomaly that carved out a space between the dusty fields of the peasantry and the gilded halls of the nobility. Today, we're going to delve deeper into the very heart of their existence, exploring the intricate tapestry of their dual life, one hand on the plow, the other on the sword, all under the watchful and often demanding eye of their king. Imagine, if you will, the typical commoner in medieval times. When the call to arms came, they marched. They carried what they could, often rudimentary weapons, and they fought on foot, their bravery born more of necessity and duty than any particular military training or equipment. This was the norm across much of Europe. But in the unique crucible of medieval Portugal, Castile, and Leon, something different emerged. If a commoner, a free plebeian, demonstrated a certain level of affluence, their obligations shifted dramatically. This wasn't just about owning a bit more land or a few more livestock, it was about the horse. The horse, my friends, was the game changer. To own a horse and the associated weapons elevated you. You weren't just a commoner anymore, you were a Knight-Villein. Cavaleiro Villão in Portuguese, Caballero Villano in Spanish. The name itself speaks volumes. Knight a warrior, a mounted fighter, and Villein a commoner, often a peasant tied to the land. It's a contradiction in terms, yet in the fierce, ever-shifting landscape of the Iberian frontier, it was a practical necessity, a living reality. This class, the Knight-Villein, occupied the highest echelon of free commoners, just a step below the minor nobility, and their existence was a testament to the brutal demands of the Reconquista. Let's be clear, this wasn't some casual suggestion. This was an obligation, often enshrined in the very charters of their towns. Take, for instance, the town charter of Penella, a document that perfectly illustrates this societal expectation. It reads, and I quote, "All those that dwell here and have 2 yoke of oxen and 10 sheep and 2 cows and a bed of cloth, he that has more, let him get also a horse." It's a beautifully blunt and practical decree, isn't it? It sets out a clear benchmark of prosperity, and once you met it, your role in society and your duty to the king fundamentally changed. You didn't just have to have a horse. You were obligated to get a horse. The state, the crown, demanded it. This wasn't about status symbols alone. It was about military readiness, about the very survival of the burgeoning kingdoms. So, what did this dual life entail? Well, for one, it meant direct military service to the king. Not to a local lord, not to a count, but directly to the monarch. This was a significant distinction, cementing their connection to the crown and bypassing some of the traditional feudal hierarchies. In exchange for this vital service, these Knight-Villeins were granted a remarkable set of privileges, privileges that were usually reserved for the minor nobility. Imagine that, a commoner, not born into power, yet wielding legal and financial advantages akin to the aristocracy. For instance, they did not pay scutage. For those unfamiliar, scutage was a payment made by a knight or feudal tenant to avoid military service. The Knight-Villein, by virtue of their direct service, was exempt. Their very existence on horseback, ready for war, was their payment. Beyond financial relief, their word carried immense weight in the courts. Their testimony, unlike that of the common peasant, was considered proof. This wasn't merely a matter of social standing. It was a profound legal advantage, offering a shield of credibility that most commoners could only dream of. It speaks to the trust placed in them, a trust forged in the fires of conflict. Now, let's talk about the nature of their military service, particularly in medieval Portugal. It was often a cycle of anticipation and action. 2/3 of Knight-Villeins were obligated to participate in what was known as a *fasado, a raid into Muslim territory. This wasn't a full-scale invasion, but rather a strategic, often opportunistic foray. These raids were typically for a set number of weeks, a period designed to be disruptive, to gather intelligence, and crucially, to acquire loot. And yes, they were absolutely entitled to a share of that captured loot. Imagine the motivation, not just duty, but the very real prospect of enriching oneself, of bringing back spoils that could further secure their land, their families, their future. It was a potent blend of national service and personal enterprise. But with privilege came responsibility, and with responsibility came consequences. If the call to arms came due to a foreign invasion and a Knight-Villein failed to respond, the penalties were steep. A fine of 15 soldos was levied. To put that into perspective, a soldo was a significant unit of currency, often representing a day's wages or more for a skilled laborer. 15 soldos was no trifling sum. It was a serious deterrent, underscoring the vital importance of their presence on the battlefield. What truly set the Knight-Villeins apart and fundamentally shaped the frontier was their initiative. They didn't always wait for a royal decree to act. They often organized raids into Muslim lands of their own volition. Think about that for a moment. Commoners banding together, riding into enemy territory, not just defending their homes but actively expanding the frontier. This wasn't just about military strategy. It was about a way of life. They were, in essence, self-organizing units of expansion, pushing the boundaries of the Christian kingdoms through sheer grit and a desire for land and resources. This aggressive, proactive approach naturally led them to settle in and around the frontier towns, particularly in southern and eastern Portugal. These settlements, by their very nature, took on a distinct military character. They weren't just agricultural centers. They were garrisons, outposts in a perpetually contested land. The sounds of daily life would have been intertwined with the clang of the blacksmith shaping weapons, the neighing of horses being readied for a ride, and the discussions of patrols and watch duties. Consider the period between the capture of Coimbra in 1064 and the fall of Lisbon in 1147. This was a pivotal era in the Reconquista, a time of relentless push southwards. And who, my friends, was at the forefront of this monumental expansion? It wasn't solely the grand armies of kings or the established nobility. No, the conquest of land from Al-Andalus, the relentless march of the frontier, was overwhelmingly undertaken by minor nobles and, crucially, by these Knight-Villeins, hailing from the towns and the rural communities. They were the spearhead, the gritty, determined individuals who literally carved out the future of Portugal with their swords and their plows. They represent a unique fusion of the warrior and the farmer, a living embodiment of a society constantly at war, where every able-bodied man, if he had the means, was expected to contribute to the defense and expansion of the realm. Their legacy is not just one of battles won, but of towns founded, of land settled, and of a social structure reimagined to meet the demands of a brutal, yet transformative, era. They were the engine of expansion, the backbone of the frontier, and their story is one that is far too often overlooked in the grand narratives of medieval history. And in our next segment, we'll explore the fascinating and often surprising privileges that truly set these Knight-Villeins apart, and what those privileges tell us about the priorities of the kings they served. And so, we arrive at the heart of what made the Knight-Villein such a fascinating, and dare I say, unprecedented figure in the tapestry of medieval society. We've established their dual existence, straddling the worlds of the plow and the sword. But to truly understand their unique position, we must delve into the remarkable privileges they commanded, rights that set them apart from the common rabble, and even, in some crucial aspects, aligned them with the lower echelons of the nobility. Imagine, if you will, the social landscape of medieval Iberia. A rigid hierarchy, often brutal in its enforcement, dictated every aspect of life. At the top, the king, then the great magnates, the bishops, and so on, down through the various strata of the nobility. Below them, the vast majority, the commoners, the villeins, whose lives were often defined by labor and, crucially, by their lack of status and protection. To be a commoner was to be in many ways an unperson in the eyes of the law, a cog in the agricultural machine. But then there were these extraordinary individuals, the *Cavaleiro Villão* in Portuguese, the *Caballero Villano* in Spanish. Free plebeian horsemen. A term that even today sounds like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it? A commoner, yet a horseman. A peasant, yet equipped for war. This alone was a radical departure from the norm. Typically, those who rode to war, who owned the expensive horse and the even more expensive weapons, were precisely those who belonged to the noble class. Their very ability to equip themselves was often the hallmark of their elevated status. Yet, here we find a class of individuals who, despite not possessing noble blood, commanded the resources and the skills necessary for mounted combat. This wasn't just a matter of personal wealth, though that was certainly a prerequisite. It was an obligation, an expectation woven into the very fabric of their communities. Consider the town charter of Penella, a snapshot from that distant past, which explicitly laid out the requirements. All those that dwell here and have 2 yoke of oxen and 10 sheep and 2 cows and a bed of cloth, he that has more, let him get also a horse. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a clear directive. If you possessed a certain level of affluence, you were not just allowed to own a horse, you were obligated to do so. And with that horse came the mantle of the Knight-Villein. And what did this obligation grant them? This is where the story truly becomes captivating. For their direct military service to the king, these Knight-Villeins were entitled to a suite of privileges that would have been unimaginable for any other commoner. Let's unpack some of these. Firstly, and perhaps most significantly, they were exempt from scutage. For those unfamiliar with the intricacies of feudal finance, scutage was essentially a payment made by a knight or noble in lieu of actual military service. It was a financial burden, a tax on their noble status. To be exempt from this was to be placed on par with, or even above, many minor nobles. It was a tangible recognition of their active, frontline contribution to the kingdom's defense, a powerful signal that their physical presence on the battlefield held more value than a mere monetary contribution. Imagine the pride, the sense of inherent worth, that this exemption would have instilled in a man who, in almost every other aspect, was still considered a commoner. But the privileges didn't stop at their pocketbooks. Their standing in the eyes of the law was equally transformative. In medieval courts, where social status often dictated the weight of one's word, the testimony of a Knight-Villein was considered *proof*. This was a monumental shift. For most commoners, their word alone might not carry much weight. They might require oath helpers or other forms of corroboration. But for the Knight-Villein, his word, like that of a noble, was sufficient. This speaks volumes about the trust and respect accorded to them, a direct consequence of their vital role in protecting the realm. It elevated them beyond the realm of suspicion and placed them within a sphere of legal credibility previously reserved for the aristocracy. This unique legal standing, coupled with their financial exemptions, effectively placed them at the very pinnacle of the free commoner class, a distinct tier just below the nobility. They were not nobles by birth, no, but they were certainly not common villeins either. They occupied a liminal space, a bridge between two worlds, carved out by their service and their possessions. Their military role wasn't just about defensive actions when called upon by the king. These were men of action, often taking the initiative in the ongoing struggle of the Reconquista. A significant proportion of Knight-Villeins in medieval Portugal, two-thirds in fact, were obligated to participate in a **fasado*, a raid on Muslim territory for a set number of weeks. This wasn't merely a defensive stance. It was an offensive one, a proactive engagement in the expansion and securing of Christian lands. And for their participation, they were entitled to a share of the captured loot, a direct, tangible reward for their bravery and their contribution to the war effort. But woe betide the Knight-Villein who shirked his duties. If the call to arms came in the event of a foreign invasion and they failed to respond, a hefty fine of 15 soldos awaited them. This was no small sum, a testament to the seriousness with which their military obligations were viewed. It underscored the fact that their privileges were not handouts. They were earned, and they came with stringent responsibilities. This constant engagement, this inherent military character, meant that Knight-Villeins were often at the forefront of the frontier. They organized raids on Muslim lands on their own initiative, pushing the boundaries, settling in and around the burgeoning frontier towns in southern and eastern Portugal. These settlements, by their very nature, took on a distinct military character, serving as outposts and staging grounds for further expansion. It's crucial to remember the context here. Between the capture of Coimbra in 1064 and the pivotal capture of Lisbon in 1147, a period of immense change and conflict, the conquest of land from Al-Andalus, the Muslim-held territories, was not solely the work of kings and great lords. It was a complex, multifaceted effort, and a significant portion of that conquest was undertaken by these very individuals, the minor nobles and, crucially, the Knight-Villeins from the towns and rural communities. They were the boots on the ground, the riders on the frontier, the very people shaping the evolving map of medieval Iberia with their swords and their plows. So, when we speak of the unprecedented privileges of the Knight-Villein, we are not just talking about legal footnotes or obscure historical details. We are talking about a class of individuals who, through their unique circumstances and their vital contributions, carved out a space for themselves in a society that was otherwise incredibly resistant to social mobility. They were the embodiment of earned status, proving that in the crucible of war and expansion, even a commoner with a horse and a sword could rise to a position of respect, influence, and remarkable legal standing. They were, in essence, the self-made men of medieval Iberia, their privileges a testament to their unwavering dedication to the defense and expansion of their kingdoms. And in doing so, they left an indelible mark on the history of Portugal and Castile, a legacy of dual lives, forged in the fires of conflict and sustained by the sweat of their brows. Welcome back, my friends. We've journeyed through the rise of a unique social class, explored their challenging dual lives, and even touched upon the surprising privileges that set them apart. Now, as our time together in this fascinating corner of history draws to a close, we turn our gaze to how these individuals, the Knight-Villeins, weren't just a byproduct of their age, but rather active shapers of it, particularly in the fledgling kingdom of Portugal. Imagine the Iberian Peninsula, a vibrant tapestry of cultures and conflicts, where the lines between what was Christian and what was Muslim were constantly shifting. This wasn't a static map. It was a living, breathing frontier, and it demanded a certain kind of person to not just survive, but to thrive within its ever-changing boundaries. This is where the Knight-Villein truly came into their own, becoming instrumental in the very forging of Portugal as we know it. Their unique position, remember, as free commoners with land, weapons, and horses, made them perfectly suited for the relentless, often brutal process of territorial expansion that defined the Reconquista. Unlike the grand campaigns led by kings and powerful nobles, a significant portion of the actual ground-level work of conquest and settlement was undertaken by these very men. Think about it. While commoners typically fought on foot, the Knight-Villein was mounted. This wasn't merely a status symbol. It was a tactical advantage of immense importance. A mounted force could cover ground faster, strike harder, and escape more efficiently. In the unpredictable skirmishes and raids that characterized frontier warfare, this speed and mobility were priceless. Their obligation to own a horse, as dictated by the level of their affluence, wasn't just a burden. It was an investment in the future of their communities and ultimately their nascent kingdom. We see this clearly articulated in the town charters of the time. Take the Charter of Penella, for example, which explicitly states that all those that dwell here and have 2 yoke of oxen and 10 sheep and 2 cows and a bed of cloth, he that has more, let him get also a horse. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a mandate. It highlights how deeply intertwined the economic well-being of a commoner was with their military readiness. Possessions weren't just for comfort. They were the means to an end. A horse for defense, for raids, for the very expansion of the kingdom. In medieval Portugal, this military obligation was formal and significant. 2/3 of Knight-Villeins were expected to participate in what was known as a *fasado*, a raid into Muslim territory for a set number of weeks. This wasn't a casual affair. They were entitled to a share of the captured loot, a powerful incentive. But the consequences of not answering the call were equally clear. A hefty fine of 15 soldos if they failed to respond to a foreign invasion. This tells us that their military service was not voluntary in the modern sense. It was a fundamental duty, a civic responsibility tied to their very existence as land-owning freemen. But it wasn't just about official summons. These Knight-Villeins, living on the edge of the frontier, often took matters into their own hands. They organized raids on Muslim lands of their own initiative. Why? For loot, yes, for a chance at a better life, but also for security. By pushing the frontier outwards, by harassing their neighbors, they were creating a buffer, safeguarding their own lands and communities. This self-driven, almost entrepreneurial approach to warfare is a key characteristic of their contribution. They were not merely soldiers, they were pioneers. This spirit of proactive engagement led them to settle in or around the frontier towns in southern or eastern Portugal. These settlements, by their very nature, took on a distinct military character. They were not just agricultural hubs, they were outposts, strategic points in a simmering conflict. The architecture, the town planning, the very social fabric of these places were shaped by the constant threat and the need for defense. Consider the period between the capture of Coimbra in 1064 and the capture of Lisbon in 1147. This was a crucial era in the formation of Portugal, a time of relentless expansion from **Al-Andalus**. While we often focus on the grand narratives of kings and counts, the historical records reveal that the actual conquest of land, the gritty, day-to-day struggle for territory, was largely undertaken by a combination of minor nobles and, crucially, by these Knight-Villeins from the towns and rural communities. They were the ones on the ground, literally carving out the new kingdom, piece by bloody piece. Their role was multifaceted. They were settlers who turned wilderness into productive land, soldiers who defended and expanded that land, and citizens who contributed to the economic and social fabric of their growing communities. They were the backbone of the nascent Portuguese state, providing both agricultural output and military strength. Without their unique blend of commoner grit, martial skill, and landownership, the trajectory of medieval Portugal, and indeed of the entire Reconquista, might have been very different. The Knight-Villein, therefore, stands as a testament to the fluidity and dynamism of medieval society. They challenge our conventional notions of rigid class structures, demonstrating how circumstance, necessity, and individual initiative could forge a new type of social actor. They were not born into nobility, yet they fought like knights. They were not feudal vassals in the traditional sense, yet they provided essential military service directly to their king. They were, in essence, the citizen soldiers of their age, deeply embedded in their communities, yet constantly reaching for the horizon, forging a nation with every swing of their sword and every furrow of their plow. And so, we bring our journey with the Knight-Villein to a close. From their humble origins as affluent commoners to their pivotal role in the shaping of kingdoms, their story is a powerful reminder that history is often made not just by kings and queens, but by the extraordinary lives of ordinary people, who, when called upon, rise to meet the challenges of their time, leaving an indelible mark on the world. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep vibing with history. And so, our journey through the fields and battlegrounds of medieval Iberia comes to a close for now. The tale of the Knight-Villein, a testament to the adaptability and unique character of a forgotten age, leaves us much to ponder. Their story, a blend of duty, privilege, and resilience, truly highlights how complex and fascinating the past can be. If you found solace, focus, or even just a moment of historical escape in our time together, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or sharing this with another curious mind. Your engagement fuels these journeys. Tell me, what part of the Knight-Villein's world resonated most with you, and what forgotten corners of history should we explore next? Until our next shared moment, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep vibing with history.